Okay, just a couple of mentions of some of the things that you already heard about. Just want to add a couple of things about the Cardiff Giant. Right, so you heard that the Cardiff Giant was essentially a deliberate hoax. Well, I guess you can't really have a indeliberate hoax, but it was done kind of as a joke, a way to fool people. It attracted a lot of attention in the 1860s. P.T. Barnum tried to buy it. They wouldn't sell it to him. P.T. Barnum ended up making his own version of it, so it was like a fake of a fake. And now the original fake of the Cardiff Giant is in the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown, New York. But P.T. Barnum's fake might actually be here in Michigan, in Farmington Hills. One of my favorite places in Michigan is Marvin's Marvelous Mechanical Museum. It's sort of like a cross between Dave and Buster's and a museum. It's a pretty amazing place. They have pinball games and video games and things like that, but they also have a lot of mechanical devices from the late 19th century, early 20th century. They've got all sorts of antiques. It's a really interesting place. When all this coronavirus stuff clears up, maybe you guys will get a chance to go there. But on display is the Cardiff Giant, and this is probably the P.T. Barnum version, unless it's a fake of that one. Who knows? But it probably is. The crystal skulls. I'm using some pictures from a presentation that Mark Zender did. He's at Tulane University. He's a Mayanist, and he's written a couple of things about these skulls. Right? There's nothing about these skulls that is real. That is, stylistically they're incorrect. We're going to see the provenience is incorrect. There's nothing to recommend them as real artifacts. So what do we know about the crystal skulls? Well, they've garnered a lot of attention. Not just because they're sort of interesting objects, but they kind of give support to this idea that ancient people either had really advanced technology, or that there was this advanced technology that existed then but didn't come from them. But they've examined all of the skulls scientifically, and none of them were made using the tools that were available at that time. And it's very clear that they were made with 19th century jeweler's drills, right? So these are all modern. They're not even forgeries, because they're not sort of trying to replicate anything that actually existed. They're completely made up artifacts. There's also no mention of crystal skulls at all in any Mesoamerican mythology or history. One of the early ones was quote-unquote discovered by this guy Mitchell Hedges, who is kind of I guess you call him a freelance explorer / con artist, who traveled extensively, wrote exaggerated tales of his travels, wrote books about his travels, but he was pretty much a BS artist, and that's kind of putting it nicely. After he, the supposed place where he found it was a Maya city called Lubatun. After he wrote about that city, he never mentioned crystal skulls until about 20 years later, or 10 or 20 years later, and then described having found it there. And so that's pretty dubious, because if you found something like that at the time, you would probably write about it. But it's clear that he obtained it in the 40s and then tried to place its discovery back in the 1920s, right? So he was kind of big into Atlantis theories, so he's sort of looking for Atlantis in Mesoamerica. And then, of course, the crystal skull takes on this kind of occult status. Hedges supports this idea that it, all sorts of crazy stuff, that, it could predict the future, et cetera, right? It says that it must have taken 150 years because the Maya would have made it by grinding it down, with sand or something like that. And so they would have worked on this over a time span of 150 years. A real Maya archaeologist, J. Eric Thompson, kind of knew a little bit about Mitchell Hedges, when he was sort of in Central America, and considered him a crackpot, and wrote about him a little bit later in one of his books on his work on the Maya area, right? And said, for example, that Hedges claimed to have found a lost city, and Thompson points out that archaeologists had known about Lubantun for decades already, so he didn't find anything new. Great quote of his. He was sort of dissing Hedges' Land of Wonder and Fear, and Thompson wrote, "To me, the wonder was how he could write such nonsense, and fear of how much taller the next yarn would be." Right? Hedges also wrote this book, "Danger is My Ally." His daughter, he claimed, and at one account, that his daughter found the crystal skull on her 17th birthday. His daughter kind of promoted this idea of having occult powers and things like that. Another important part of the analysis is that stylistically, there's nothing Maya or Aztec about these skulls, because we do have examples of Maya skulls that were carved in stone, right? So this is from Copan, and you can see Maya skulls. It's a skull rack, that symbolizes sacrifices. This is what a Maya version of a skull looks like. This is what an Aztec version of a skull looks like. If you put them side by side with what we find with these crystal skulls, they look nothing alike, but the crystal skulls look a lot like 19th century anatomy books, or the diagrams from anatomy books. So most likely that was the source. People have also said that the skull, if you did like a reconstruction of the anatomical features, it's sort of a quote-unquote European kind of version of a skull. So it's not even consistent with, let's say, the kinds of facial features you would have in Mesoamerica. So all of them are forgeries. Another popular forgery, this one's especially popular with creationists and people who kind of want to prove that humans and dinosaurs coexisted, are these Ica stones. These Ica stones were first made by some local Peruvians when this local doctor got word of them. He was very, very interested in these stones. The local people, it seems like, start to manufacture more of them to kind of meet that demand. In the end, this guy retired from medicine and built a museum. He ended up with 15,000 of these stones. And, you could see someone writing sort of like a dinosaur over here. Well, they're pretty outlandish. They were never found in context. They were never found by archaeologists. In terms of the culture that made these stones, there's no evidence of any sort of culture in that specific area. So who made them? Well, it's, as from an archaeological perspective, there's no evidence that they were made in ancient times. There's no actually good archaeological context. And the person who actually did make them confessed a few years later, and said, they asked him, "Why'd you do it?" And it's a little bit like, I forgot his name now, but this famous bank robber, they once asked him, "Why do you rob banks?" And he said, "Because that's where the money is." They asked this guy, "Why'd you forge these artifacts?" He said, "Well, beats farming for a living. But he showed them how he did it. He took these stones, he carved these pictures. He got the pictures from books he had lying around of dinosaurs. He showed how he carved it. He made a fake patina by leaving it in the chicken coop so that the feces kind of made sort of a brownish stain on it. So clearly fake, but still touted today by people as clear evidence that evolution is wrong, that creationism is correct, dinosaurs and humans coexisted. So even though it's a very clear forgery, people still accept it for whatever reason. Okay, this is going to end our discussion of fakes, frauds, and forgeries. Related to this will be our next topic, which will be cryptozoology. So Yeti, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, all that kind of fun stuff. So I will see you guys soon, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks.